Alright, first off, I'm going to be reading and looking at my notes, my 21 pages of notes, and not at the camera most of the time. Sorry, I know it's awkward. Also, I'm going to be any pronouncing Matt, the character, throughout this video. Okay? One of my pet topics recently has been narratives surrounding patterns of violence in society. This topic is something I have a lot of big and complicated thoughts and feelings about. Petty as it is when placed next to the actual violence, I do believe that the stories we tell about violence matter a lot. There's no such thing as an apolitical story, and there's no such thing as apolitical violence, and I believe that looking at them both can provide great insight into the society that produces them. Anyway, The Dirties is a 2013 pseudo-documentary directed by Canadian filmmaker and Nirvana the Band The Show co-creator Matt Johnson. It's about two teenage best friends who make a movie about killing their bullies, and the catch is that one of them starts wanting to commit the murders for real. It's a good movie. Go watch it now because I'm going to be spoiling it throughout the video. And I'm also going to be talking about it with the assumption that you've already seen it. This isn't going to be a summary video. Go watch it, just look up the content first. It's kind of disturbing. Before talking about the movie itself on its own, I'm going to have to talk about school shootings and how it deals with and relates to them. Little disclaimer, I feel a little bit awkward talking so much about anything specifically to do with school violence, mainly because I was homeschooled and I never had to fear or experience it, and in that way I am speaking from a place of tremendous privilege, especially because I had a really good experience of being homeschooled compared to a lot of other people. Disclaimer number two, in this section I'm going to say some controversial and potentially kind of harsh things. Sorry in advance. I really like The Dirties as a work of fiction. There are some other things I could and will criticize about it, but ultimately I think it's a great movie and I really like it. However, the thing that makes me have some complicated feelings about it is the fact that it is a school shooting movie. Responding to and trying to tackle this incredibly serious topic, and something about the way that it does that feels iffy to me, and I'm going to try my best to explain why. There are a few different ways to analyze the various types of shootings that take place inside and on school grounds. I will be looking at the topic through the lens of anarchist, feminist, anti-abuse politics because I find that to be an incredibly useful framework. Real quick, if you want to read about the topic of gun violence in schools from another perspective that also makes a huge point about needing to differentiate between different types, you can check out Not All School Shootings Are the Same and the Differences Matter, published by the National Bureau of Economic Research. I found it really interesting. Anyway, blaming school shootings on bullying is, in my opinion, functionally a type of Darvo narrative. Darvo stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim, and Offender. It is a term coined by Jennifer Freyd and generally used in discussions of child abuse and domestic abuse to refer to the process by which an abuser claims that they are the true victim and that their victim is the true perpetrator. Something that sometimes comes with this is the claim of mutual abuse, a concept which is not recognized by abuse research and which equivocates violence used to wield power over and control over others, what we might call authoritarian violence, with violence used to resist control or defend oneself, what we might call liberatory violence. The claim of mutual abuse is one I've seen catch on very easily because it reads as nuanced, and to a lot of people more nuanced just equals more good. Darvo narratives have had great success within the legal system and within the public, successfully allowing many an abuser to claim victimhood, or that their victim was actually at fault and deserved it somehow, or that, well, everyone involved was evil, so what can you do? When applied to the context of school shootings and the discussions surrounding them, what this means is that the media works to blame the victims of school shootings by making out their murderers to be the true victims, tragic, bullied loners who understandably lashed out against their tormentors. While there are surely situations in which victims of peer abuse, and let's be real, that's what we mean when we say bullying, use violence against their abusers, that is not what we mean when we say school shooting. The term school shooting, the image it conjures, and the specific major events it is used to refer to is a term which implies an indiscriminate act of mass violence. It is a term which invokes the Columbine massacre and events similar to it, often events in which the shooters were directly inspired by the Columbine massacre. When the concepts of retaliation against peer abuse and mass shootings are flattened into one, this is what creates the Darvo narrative. It creates the narrative that somehow all the people getting indiscriminately mowed down were at fault for their own deaths. I feel that this type of Darvo narrative is often applied to mass violence carried out by young men, whether it takes place in a school or elsewhere, resulting in more or less a societal hostage situation where everybody is constantly made to feel that if we had only been kinder to him, if girls had only put out for him, if only everyone had given him everything he'd ever felt entitled to, if only, then maybe he wouldn't have had to hurt you. Another way in which the politics of abuse overlap with mass violence is the myth of the cycle of violence, a theory which does not hold up to the smallest amount of intellectual scrutiny, and which claims that being victimized turns people into abusers. It's a claim that also takes responsibility away from the perpetrators of violence, distracts from necessary conversations about the politics of intimate authoritarianism, or in the case of mass murder, grassroots fascism, and places victims of such things as abuse and rape, and in this case peer abuse and school violence, under even more suspicion, and increases the amount of shame and isolation they suffer from. The exact details of the wrongness of this theory and why it's wrong are a bit complicated, so instead I'm going to point to a thread by Lee Sakuda and link to it in the description. It summarizes the issues with the cycle of violence concept better than I can. Read through it and then think very hard about how it applies to the topic of mass murder. One of the key points made in this thread is, quote, "Trivially, yes, being the subject of abuse is one way someone can learn and internalize abusive values. And how those values are actually internalized by a victim of violence is far more complicated than the idea that they were broken by experiencing that violence. An abusive man who was abused as a boy learned those values, sure, but learned them within a tapestry of social values and practices that worked together to impart an ideology about manhood, about power, about the value of children, and about how he could one day claim that power," unquote. A person who carries out mass violence may have also experienced violence and peer abuse that may have played a role in how they internalized violent and abusive values, but it is much more complicated than just that. The choice to respond to peer abuse by punching down on innocent people, violently dominating them, rather than punching up on whoever is specifically committing the abuse, is an ideological one, and it's an ideological choice that is deeply reflective of certain culturally dominant attitudes. The point being, these popular narratives are wildly unproductive ways to understand mass violence, just as they are wildly unproductive ways to understand abuse, and it has done absolutely nothing to help. Rather than confronting the ideological underpinnings of these kinds of behaviors and confronting the society that consistently produces patterns of brutal violence primarily committed by men, this attitude validates the grievances of entitled young reactionaries and places the blame for their terrorism on the shoulders of their victims, all while increasing suspicion towards bullied and often neurodivergent children and leading them to be falsely labeled as future school shooters. Important note, I am not the first person to make this connection. I've seen several other people make this connection between the politics of abuse and the politics of mass murder, and unfortunately I can't remember who I saw point it out first, so shout out to whoever first thought of that. Sorry if I'm plagiarizing your ideas. H-Bomber guy, don't kill me. The Dirties is a school shooting movie. That is how it is consistently interpreted and categorized, and as far as I can tell, that is how the people involved in making it see it. It features references to other school shooting movies and to the Columbine massacre, but it is a school shooting movie that has no school shooting and no school shooter. Though the character of Matt reads about and references the Columbine massacre, and in particular is deeply affected by the description of psychopathy in the book Columbine by Dave Cullen, more on that later, and refers to what he's planning as a school shooting, the actual attack that he carries out bears little resemblance to the massacres that the term describes. Matt, a victim of what could be reasonably categorized as homophobic assaults and harassment, carries out a targeted attack against the specific people who have wronged him, ultimately only killing 2 boys who we have previously seen assault him multiple times. Matt does not open fire into the crowd of fleeing students, and even wears a shirt which reads, "We're just here for the bad guys," in an attempt to convey to the other students that he poses no threat to them. While his view that proclaiming he's just here for the bad guys will make much difference in terms of the trauma inflicted on the witnesses is laughable, the truth is that who he targets and the context leading up to the murders does still make the violence that he carries out fundamentally different from the Columbine massacre and other shootings in its category. It is, in my opinion, categorically not a school shooting. Violence, in my opinion, can speak for itself within its context and has meaning and politics that exist completely separate from the stated or actual intent of the persons carrying it out. And so the fact that Matt describes his own actions as a school shooting does not affect my categorization. And to be clear, not a school shooting does not mean good. It was a bad thing to do. Do not bring a gun into a school under any circumstances. Ever. While Matt is a great character, a complicated person whose motives and actions aren't easy to categorize, I fear that a movie about a kid retaliating against the people who assaulted him being categorized as a school shooting movie runs the risk of validating popular Darvo and cycle of abuse narratives. I feel a bit bad saying all this because I've listened to particularly interviews with Matt Johnson, and I understand his intent and where he's coming from with the portrayal of this character, both in terms of needing to reckon with the kinds of things that these events force everyone to reckon with, namely trying to find the dividing line between yourself and the kinds of completely ordinary people who carry out the most horrific acts of brutality, and in terms of trying to combat a simplistic view of innate evil being the cause of these events. I think that this movie does a good job of invoking the feeling he describes when talking about the Columbine massacre, the discomfort of seeing yourself in someone who does and says things you find abhorrent. He's said a lot of really earnest and vulnerable things about working on this movie, and I'm coming in here with the steamroller of my harsh political criticism, and I feel kind of mean saying all this, but ultimately this is how I feel and why I've ended up having such complicated feelings about this movie that I otherwise like so much. And now that I've gotten that out of my system, despite that kind of major concern, I really like The Dirties. The first time I watched it, I was very sick and felt basically nothing watching it because I was in too much pain. And then later, taking some time to chew on it, I realized that I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I see any part of it, I actually start to feel ill. It's a very emotionally evocative movie. The Dirties is like an eviler counterpart to I Saw the TV Glow, I think. Just as I Saw the TV Glow deals with navigating one's identity and relationships through being a fan of a work of art, The Dirties deals with those same topics through the lens of making art and ends on a far bleaker and more violent note. Matt is an interesting character to me in that he is sympathetic but not particularly likable. The feelings I had after watching the movie is that I almost would be less bothered by his actions if he were a different person, less casually bigoted, less of a dick, less annoying, less prone to callously making references to other people's worse crimes. Matt definitely ideates on doing worse, and we see that. A moral low point for Matt, I think, is when he writes Chrissy's name on his list of targets after the cliff scene. Whether there was any intent behind this, whether Matt would have done it had he not seen Owen and gotten distracted, is unclear. Still, it shows a potential to do worse, to expand the definition of the bad guys beyond all meaning. Still, what Matt actually does, what we actually see of Matt's actions, is that he, during a mental health crisis, shoots 2 guys who had been regularly assaulting him, and then just kind of gets distracted looking for his friend, and the violence ceases. Like I said, it's horrific, it's traumatic to all the bystanders and witnesses, but fundamentally, killing those specific guys during a mental health crisis was understandable even if it wasn't right. When I first watched the movie, Matt came across as the kind of person who is glorifying school shooters, but after having some time to chew on it and after rewatching the movie, I don't think that's accurate, though I definitely think he wants the attention that comes from being a school shooter. I think that Matt's relationship to this concept and to these people is a bit more complicated. I think Matt is trying to basically be subversive, appropriating the imagery and language of a school shooting, referencing school shooting movies and the Columbine Massacre, and yet only killing the bad guys, subverting the expectation of what a school shooting is supposed to look like, and blurring the lines between edgy art piece and act of violence. I speak egotistical prick, which Matt is, and in my opinion, I think what Matt expresses about the Columbine shooters is less admiration and more of that I could do what they did better, both artistically better and morally better, by only killing the bad guys. To me, it reads as a sense of superiority over and disdain towards them, not admiration. Of course, the other side of this egotism is insecurity, and we see that when Matt reads the book Columbine by Dave Cullen, specifically reading out a passage on psychopathy to Owen. Quick aside, this part of the book actually pissed me off. Like, seriously, the book Columbine by Dave Cullen lays out Harris's eugenics screed and his calls for further political action, which literally fucking worked because there's a fuck ton of Columbine copycats and dipshits who read and love and relate to his writing, and it just fucking ignores all of the social implications of that to focus on his individual psychology and pathology, and ooh, he's a special boy with evil special boy disorder. He has psychopathy, a thing which only cops and feds and the kind of assholes who work with cops and feds think is even real. It really pisses me off. Anyway. Whatever. When Matt says,
"This is exactly what you were saying about me." Are you hearing this? I could be a psychopath. Owen, I could be a psychopath.
That doesn't come across to me like Matt happily identifying with these guys and glorifying them. It comes across as Matt being insecure in his relationship with Owen, feeling rejected after their fight in the cliff scene, seeking reassurance that his fears about himself aren't true and that Owen doesn't think that of him. When Owen ignores him and then snaps at him when Matt continues to push the issue, it's confirming his fears about himself and confirming that Owen is rejecting and abandoning him. Their fight is really devastating, and I don't think either of them are entirely in the wrong. Owen says a lot of very true things about Matt, as well as a lot of really cruel things, and I think it's reasonable that Matt is upset at Owen for brushing him off in favor of texting Chrissy, especially considering that Matt is, like, actively having a mental health crisis. It's reasonable to want support, and it's reasonable to be upset if your friend is too busy focusing on dating, I think. At the heart of their fight and their argument at the cliff is a failure to communicate. Owen still sees everything Matt is doing as a joke, sees Matt's refusal to be emotionally vulnerable, and assumes that everything Matt says is untrue, and doesn't realize that what Matt is doing is using the protective shield of a joking tone to express his honest emotions. Matt is incredibly honest throughout the movie, repeatedly expressing homicidal ideation and passive suicidal ideation, and displaying a decent amount of awareness that his mental state is rapidly deteriorating. Obviously, Owen saying,
"But nobody likes you, and no one wants to talk to you, and no one wants to be around you, and nobody wants to see you,"
is a horrible thing to say to someone who is actively having an onset of mental illness and is passively suicidal. I think it's incredibly likely that the things Owen said and the ways that Owen confirmed Matt's fears played a role in Matt's choice to do what he did. But I also don't think Owen can be blamed for it. First of all, because killing those people was still Matt's choice, and second of all, because Owen is still just a kid, and it would be unreasonable to expect him to know what to do when his friend is experiencing an onset of serious mental illness. Owen lashing out is as much a bid for connection as Matt expressing his fears of being a psychopath is. As far as he sees, Matt is just acting weird and driving him away for seemingly no reason. It's clear that he doesn't realize yet just how severely something has shifted for Matt mentally. When he says,
You're jealous
I'm
of the
not
one
jealous.
other person who ever talks to me.
He's directly calling out one of the things seemingly causing the distance between them, namely Matt's queerness and attraction to Owen. But it doesn't seem like he's upset that Matt is queer. It seems like he's upset that Matt won't be vulnerable with him and open up about it. And I think that because of this, he too is feeling rejected. I feel like every time I rewatch any part of this movie, I'm caught off guard by how fond of Matt Owen obviously is and how long it takes for Owen to start pushing Matt away. There are several scenes where Matt says or does something horrible or does some crazy shit, and Owen looks at them like, well, this.
Not a movie of everybody dead. No, if we went in and but if we actually did it, but we just blew them away, all on camera.
I don't know, I just think that Owen really does care for Matt a lot, regardless of whether he likes Matt back romantically. The amount of time between their fight and the murders is unclear. Whether it's directly the next day or a couple days later isn't really clear, but it does seem to be soon after. Their fight catalyzes Matt fully escalating to violence, and it's so tragic because at the core of their fight was the fact that they really do care for each other and want to connect and don't know how. Part of Matt's motivation for the murders is to win Owen back, proving his ability to be a protector and the strength of his feelings for Owen, and yet it ends up being the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. The ways they care about each other drive them apart. Also, Matt taking down all his posters and cleaning up his room after their fight is really upsetting. Matt seems to be at his most lucid at this point, and probably also at his most suicidal. The fact that he's putting away all his stuff like that makes it clear he has no intention of coming back and is fully planning on being either dead or in prison. And the conversation he has with his mom shows just how aware he is that he's not doing well mentally, but that he is unwilling or unable to fully be honest about it in that moment. And the shift from this lucidity to Matt's complete disconnect from reality during the shooting is jarring but unsurprising, given the horrific nature of what Matt is doing. It makes sense that he'd start to sort of disconnect from reality and dissociate from what's happening. Obviously, the movie is open-ended on purpose, and we can't really say for sure what happens, but I genuinely do not believe that Matt went on to hurt Owen, and I think it's unlikely that Matt went on to kill anyone else. Matt's reaction to seeing Owen, the complete confusion at Owen's horror, and seemingly genuine belief that Owen just didn't realize that it was Matt doing the shooting, really conveys just how much worse Matt is doing in that moment, and how much he's lost touch with reality since the last night, and also how unfocused they are, getting distracted by Owen so easily and immediately wanting to go talk to him. The process of chasing after Owen is time that any other intended murder victims have to get away, and time for the cops to start heading over. Obviously, for the movie to exist means Jared probably scrammed right about where it ends to be able to finish editing it, and I think it's likely that Matt simply got arrested soon after without harming anyone else. I don't like to think that Matt actually went on to do a full-on school shooting after the end. I'm really glad that the movie didn't end that way, and I really dislike that as an interpretation for what happens next. Obviously, since I'm already iffy on how the movie is now regarding its take on school shootings, Matt actually fully doing one would make that initial issue of mine even worse. I also think it would remove the complexity and moral gray area that makes Matt such an interesting and tragic character. They really do have good intentions in a way. They show concern for others and try to mitigate the potential unintended harm to them. And I think the interviews at the beginning of the movie display a real sense of, like, solidarity with others in their same position, and yet they still end up doing something terrible that traumatizes everyone, and I like that the movie ends on that kind of disquieting note. Also, I think that a depiction of mental illness that ends in the mentally ill character just losing all their previous traits and values and just killing everyone would be horrible and stigmatizing and would play directly into the kind of eugenicist views that actually inspire mass violence. Obviously, I also don't think that Matt went on to hurt or kill Owen at all. I do think that one possible interpretation for what happens after the ending would be that Matt does commit suicide, though I like to think that they do not. But obviously, they are showing a lot of the signs that people tend to show before doing such a thing. And now I want to elaborate on some of the queer themes that I've been mentioning already. One of the main things going on in this movie, other than the escalation to murder, is the weird love triangle between Matt, Owen, and Chrissy. On top of that, there's also something complicated going on with Matt's gender. The movie has a really great little meta joke about this when the characters are showing their short film in class, and their teacher describes it as
A bit of a romance and a bit of a gender bender.
Chrissy, Owen's other love interest, functions more like a plot device than a character, which I think is unfortunate. I feel like we know almost nothing about her other than the fact that she hangs out with the guys that bully Matt and Owen, something which Matt makes a point of showing. Interestingly, at first, Matt is the main person regularly bringing Chrissy up to tease Owen, and perhaps more importantly, to get Owen's attention and approval. Matt uses the excuse of helping Owen get Chrissy as an excuse for them to get into hijinks together and a way to get praise for his ideas from Owen. Owen also uses Chrissy as an excuse to spend more time with Matt when Matt goes to his family's cabin. Obviously, once these plans start working and Owen starts actually spending more time with Chrissy, Matt is pretty upset, both because Chrissy is their enemy and because obviously Matt doesn't actually want Owen to get a girlfriend because they want to be Owen's girlfriend. Matt is very obviously queer and very obviously in love with Owen. The plot revolves around the fact that they are queer and closeted and being bullied for being obviously queer. I think that Matt can pretty easily be read as a gender nonconforming gay guy, trans femme non-binary, or a trans girl. There are so many layers of repression, and I don't think Matt really knows exactly what they're feeling. Personally, I definitely lean more towards a trans interpretation of Matt, especially, like, interpreting Matt as, like, a non-binary girl. For reasons that I'm going to lay out in a moment. Matt is at a stage of life where they are exploring their feelings and figuring themselves out, but is in a situation where their ability to honestly express themselves is being constrained by the threat of violent repression. In response, Matt represses their own feelings, expresses everything as a joke or a performance for the sake of plausible deniability, and exhibits a fair amount of what seems like internalized homophobia and or internalized transphobia. Regardless of the specifics of their identity, their situation is one of being violently molded into a man, and of being punished and subjected to violence for failing to be molded, and of using their art to try and create their own identity in reaction to, and often in direct opposition to, the way people are trying to mold them. Laying out the evidence for Matt being trans real quick, Matt's violent turn is catalyzed, number one, by Owen getting hit by a rock, and two, by the negative reaction to their short film, and specifically to the fact that Matt plays a woman in one scene. This comes up repeatedly throughout the movie, and since it's meant to be edited by Matt, the character, we can only assume that this is really important to them. In one of the first scenes of the movie, Matt and Owen have this exchange.
If I was the last woman on Earth, you'd still be a man.
It seems very lighthearted, but it's also one of the things that Matt chose to put at the beginning of the documentary about her own descent into madness. It's a little joke, a thwarted attempt at flirting, and perhaps a moment of Matt being reminded of the misery of her own situation, that even the person she's closest to has this reflexive response. Later, when talking about their short film, Matt says,
If people don't get this, it is going to backfire so hard. I'm going to get beaten up.
You already get beaten up all the time.
I'm going to get beaten to death.
and suggests that they should have just gotten a real girl. When they show the short film in class, and the scene where Matt plays a woman is received with a chorus of disgusted groans and mockery, Matt walks out of the class, though continues to watch through the window, being too egotistical not to continue watching and dwelling on everyone's reactions to her work. Later again, when Matt and Owen are having a sleepover, Jared films Matt, seemingly without her knowledge, though she ultimately chose to put it in the film, as she melancholically watches the scene again late into the night when Owen is already asleep. A random thought about the scene, knowing that Matt put it in, is that she's watching herself be watched watching herself. It's like a vision of hell. The point being that Matt playing a woman and the reactions to that, including Matt's own, comes up again and again and is repeatedly drawn attention to, which means that it's clearly something Matt sees as important and meaningful. I think an interesting thing about the scene is that Matt isn't just playing a woman, but specifically playing one that is seen as attractive by the other characters. The way Matt writes her own characters comes across as her playing with different roles and fantasies, one obviously being the power fantasy of being able to take violent revenge, but I think another is the fantasy of being able to be seen as a woman and be seen as desirable instead of disgusting. Matt's jealousy of Chrissy is also part of this. Obviously, Matt is jealous of Chrissy because Matt likes Owen, and Owen likes Chrissy, and Matt wants Owen to like her instead. But I also think there could be an element of being jealous that Chrissy is an attractive girl. When confronted about this jealousy of Chrissy during Matt and Owen's fight, Matt reacts with panic and anger, saying,
She's an idiot girl, man.
You're jealous
I'm
of the
not
one
jealous.
other person who ever talks to me.
I'm
Yes,
not
you
jealous
are
at all.
absolutely
She's
jealous.
retarded. I don't
You
care.
are
I just want to see my.
which is obviously misogynistic, but also seemingly an attempt at saving face. If girls are stupid, then obviously Matt can't be one and can't want to be one. Again, Matt's implied fear, expressed as a joke, was that she would be beaten to death if people think she's trans. Matt shows a lot of signs of depersonalization, derealization, and that, paired with everything else, could be a result of, or rather a coping mechanism for, intense and mostly repressed gender dysphoria. We see Matt burning her journals and looking genuinely miserable, and I can't help but wonder what she had written in them that she felt she had to burn. The Dirties clearly deals pretty heavily with self-loathing with regards to one's queerness, and I think it's really interesting contrasted with Nirvana the band The Show, which kind of deals with the same thing, especially the web series, though in a much more jokey manner. I really enjoy seeing the two different angles on the same subject, the dark, mean humor of the Nirvana the Band The Show web series, with Matt's homoerotic attachment to Jay and repression that boils over into violence being treated as humorous, versus Matt's attraction to Owen in the Dirties and whatever is going on with her gender and the shame, repression, violent lashing out, and fear of violent punishment being treated as deadly serious. I really like them both. And also, quick aside, Matt and Owen's relationship is healthier than Matt and Jay's relationship, and Matt in the Dirties is less evil than Nirvana the band, the show, Matt, especially the web series, despite the much grimmer tone of the Dirties. It's a bit sweeter. Another sort of comparison I want to make is between The Dirties and Elephant, a movie which is referenced in The Dirties and which I hated, and apparently, according to one interview I read, Matt Johnson also did not like very much, though for different reasons. Media about certain kinds of violence often makes a point to showcase the character's marginalized status, and this connects to a tendency by the news media, especially right-wing news media, to blame certain kinds of violence on marginalized groups such as queer people and people with mental disorders. I hated the movie Elephant because the characters are very clearly stand-ins for real murderers, and they're depicted as explicitly queer, and I felt that this was very in line with this general pattern, but I don't really feel the same way about The Dirties. I think it mostly dodges this issue, and I actually really like it as a queer narrative. Anyway, I want to talk about Jared. Jared, the camera guy, is kind of the weirdest character in the whole movie, though the movie is largely about Matt's relationship to Owen, and Owen functions as a main motivator for Matt's actions. Jared is the person who actually acts as the second perpetrator of the murders, albeit through complicity rather than active participation. He's visible on screen a couple of times, though only barely, and never speaks, and is mentioned by name maybe once. Matt and Owen talk as though he isn't even there, such as in the cliff scene, and Matt's inability to dispute Owen's statement that Owen is Matt's only friend would imply that he and Matt aren't even really friends. Their relationship almost seems mutually parasitic, and I'm sort of fascinated by it. The movie has several scenes in which Matt is being filmed without their knowledge during private moments. Though they had final say in those scenes being put into the movie, there's still something creepy and voyeuristic about Jared spying on his obviously mentally unwell friend and filming these incredibly vulnerable moments without her knowledge. Jared has a way of seeming like a non-entity, yet out of all of the characters, his actions kind of seem the most disturbing and insidious. Obviously, him continuing to film Matt isn't some value-neutral act, and almost certainly played a part in Matt's decline. But since he's not really Matt's friend, I guess he doesn't really care about that as much as he cares about the, I don't know, artistic merit of getting to get Matt's mental breakdown on camera. There's also an argument to be made for the movie only existing in Matt's head and for Jared not always being real, though I don't think that's intentional. I'm assuming that Andy, who's also a character in Nirvana the Band the Show, is meant to be there too, at least at the very beginning, which would account for the things that would be impossible with only one cameraman. And Owen not acknowledging Jared during the cliff scene has other explanations too. Still, I think there's a general sense that Jared could be more of a representation of Matt's mental state, her dissociation, and the sense that she's being constantly surveilled and scrutinized. And then finishing this off with one more criticism to turn it into a sort of criticism sandwich. I want to finish things off by talking about something I really, really do not like about this movie, which is the brief inclusion of blackface done by the character Matt. I do not think it's remotely justifiable. Unlike with the other kinds of bigotry being portrayed in this movie, I do not think that the Dirties has anything meaningful to say about race, and this joke should not have been included at all. Even if it did have something meaningful to say about race, it probably could have done it without blackface. Nirvana the Band the Show also has an issue with racial satire that does not always land, and it is the biggest reason why I feel iffy recommending Nirvana the Band the Show and the Dirties to other people. And that's all for now. I will probably want to talk about the Dirties more after I've seen every other piece of media it references. I think I'll probably have a lot more to say about it after that. But for now, goodbye, thanks for watching, and see you next time.